You're tuning into the Journey to Your Best Self podcast, where we explore the past holistic well-being, personal growth, and living a fulfilling life. Each episode, we bring you insightful conversations, practical tools, and inspiring stories to help you integrate your mind, body, and spirit on your journey to becoming your best self. Let's dive in and embark on this journey together. And welcome back to the Journey to Your Best Self podcast. As always, I'm your host, Brian O'Neill, joined by my sister, Tara O'Neill, clinical hypnotherapist, certified life coach, and yoga instructor. Today, we're absolutely thrilled to have Dr. Adam Dorsay with us. Dr. Dorsay is a licensed psychologist, executive coach, and the host of the award-winning Super Psyched podcast. His new book, Super Psyched, Unleash the Power of the 4 Types of Connection and Live the Life You Love, offers groundbreaking insights into how connection shapes our lives and provides actionable strategies to improve our relationships, productivity, and personal growth. With nearly 20,000 hours of therapy experience, Dr. Dorsay has worked with everyone from adolescent gang members to Fortune 500 executives. His work is a powerful reminder of the importance of connection to others, to the world around us, to spirituality, and to ourselves. So let's dive into his incredible journey and explore how we can all live more connected and meaningful lives. Without any further ado, Dr. Dorsay, welcome aboard.
Oh, so nice to see you, Brian and Tara. And all the way out in New Jersey.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously great acclaim that has come with this book. So many reviews, so much commentary and praise from a lot of people out there, from Mel Robbins and so many others. But I think that one of the things that, has me the most nervous or kind of excited is kind of your prowess as a podcast host. So hopefully I'll measure up, to the things that you've done and maybe get some pointers from you at the end. But hopefully we do ourselves proud here.
You're crushing it already, my man.
Tara, hello.
Hello. I am not promoting this on purpose, but I must say I was looking at it and I was like, Mel Robbins, making sure it wasn't like Mel Hobbins, from down the street. I'm like, what is going on?
That would be
so.
Imagine if I had it endorsed by somebody named Mel Hobbins.
Yeah.
It would be like, Harry Potter going to Bogwarts instead.
Well, we were talking about where we were at in New Jersey and back east, and that would be like the Chinatown like ripoff version of your reviews, right? But these are all legit. Of course, you've met a lot of people along the way. There's a lot of expertise, that you have, the authors you have. But you also have the people that are in the medical profession, right? That they're psychologists, psychiatrists. And I love that there's a lot of people in education that are really fond of the book and recommend it. So we'll get to all that. But I think right off the bat, the 4 types of connections, right? It's yourself, others, the world, and then something greater, right? Whether it's God, some kind of spirituality. In those 20,000 hours, and maybe more recently, what you've been noticing anecdotally or doing your research for the book, which of those 4 is the biggest concern that you have right now? Where are we, society writ large, lacking most out of those 4 connections?
Yeah, I'd say all of them, but how we connect to ourselves first in an authentic manner is very difficult. It may be one of the biggest mountains we ever climb is right between our ears. And that's the connection that informs all other connection. We know that hurt people hurt people. It's even almost a bumper sticker. And that when we aren't well connected with ourselves, it's as if we're walking through lives having to go pee and with rocks in our shoes simultaneously. So our abilities to connect with other people are profoundly impeded when we aren't well connected with who we are and what we're about. And when we don't ask for what we want and we aren't living our lives. I mean, how many people do you know who have lived the lives their parents have told them to live, or that they've just kind of extracted from various media sources? Like, this is how I'm supposed to be. When I was growing up, I remember as a boy, and you might remember this to some extent, I sense I'm a bit older, but when I grew up, there were basically 3 male prototypes. We could be like, Joe Montana and be a great football player stud. We could be like James Bond. Or we could be, which is kind of like a psychopath if you really think about it for a second. And we could be like maybe John Wayne, kind of the strong silent type, which is not so different. But those were the three types. Oh, we could also maybe be a rock star. So maybe we could be like, I don't know, let's go with Eddie Van Halen. Those were the prototypes. We were allowed to be one of those. And I was none of those. And it can be really flummoxing to try to figure out, like, wait, who am I during this life? Like, what is my song? What is my journey going to look like? And how do I be authentic to myself? Obviously, I'm not talking about a narcissistic path where all we're consumed with is just knowing who we are, but I am talking about spending adequate time in reflection, reading, being exposed to various prototypes so that we can say, oh yeah, that kind of lands with me. I remember the first time I heard Depeche Mode, I was like, oh, that's more consistent with my voice than say, I love me some David Lee Roth all day, but I can't do that. But Depeche Mode was kind of like, oh yeah, that kind of emo and kind of English, kind of smooth. That is like the first time I heard that, I was like, oh wow. But we're still and I could never say this in high school, but I talk about this a lot in the book. I loved quietly George Michael. I thought he was amazing, but you could never say that. You would get clowned on by everybody. It'd be too teeny bopper. That's like, music for girls. You're a guy, don't you remember? So connecting with ourselves informs how we connect with all of the other connections, how we connect with others, how we connect with the world, such as work, art, nature, and how we connect with something greater. And the reason I look at the fourth kind of circle, of connecting with something greater, even the most intense orthodox atheist would acknowledge that if they go to, say, the Grand Canyon, they will experience awe, which is akin to a spiritual experience, even if they don't necessarily believe that it was formed by God as we think of God. So all four are really important. I'd say we start with really being authentic with who we are at the center.
Do you think we got away from that even further in these last few generations? I know our parents were not all about, here, let's go on a self-discovery, journey per se. Just the times weren't really, didn't really allow for that per se. But now kids are really, really confused. And what do we do? How do we help them? Or do the parents help themselves? Do we live by example?
There's good news and there's bad news. The bad news is that social media has created a world of social comparison and FOMO, which I call distractors. We see somebody, crushing it, living their best life, doing all the things and doing them beautifully and perfectly. And we think, oh my God, I'm not living up to that standard. I'm sucking. And we also experience FOMO. And we think, oh, I should do this lest I not be part of the group. I would propose, first of all, that we not compare ourselves to others, but that we compare ourselves to ourselves, particularly how are we doing today relative to how were we doing yesterday? And tomorrow, am I moving the needle overall in the right direction? And that would be thing one. Thing two, I'd really propose the joy of missing out, JOMO. This is not my own idea, but there can be a lot of joy of missing out, especially when you realize that you're making your choices and you're using this resource that we'll never have again called time poorly if we're just going because of FOMO. But back in the old days, let's say when my dad grew up, there were even fewer prototypes of what it meant to be a guy. You were just kind of this quiet, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And one of the things I learned from Jeremy Utley, who's the dean of the School of Design at Stanford, is we become more creative when we are more exposed to more things, more items, more stimuli. And the more exposure we have, the more vast our ideas can become. So if we were to leverage the information that we have today, we can maybe become the REI guy. So we're out there hiking, and that's how we're rocking our Sundays. We could be the person who is businessman by day and musician by night. There's so many options. Or we could be deeply ingrained in the corporate world and suddenly realized just around the age of 40, oh my gosh, this isn't for me. I needed to go back to school. And we can do that. We can even do it virtually these days. We can earn a master's degree or a doctorate by either online or a hybrid style. We don't necessarily have to go to traditional bricks and mortars institutions. That's how I earned my doctorate. I got it working nights and weekends. Otherwise, it would not have been possible for me to have done so. So it was inconceivable to previous generations to do these things. Like, for somebody in my father's generation, you better have your entire life and career figured out by the age of 25. And these days, we come to realize that the prefrontal cortex isn't even necessarily done growing, certainly not in neurodivergent people like me who have ADHD and dyslexia. Mine didn't really come online, and I felt it come online in my late 20s. So for me to have a sense of what I was about or what I wanted to do with this precious thing called life, it took me quite a while and a lot of reflection. And I see that for the clients I serve and for the people around me.
Is there a way to stimulate that connection with yourself, or if you don't have the aha moment or the calling, is there a way that you can, or you just have to be patient and wait it out? I mean, it seems like, in the past, one benefit that a lot of the some say, right, argue that a lot of the previous generations did have was where they had to grow up fast, so they were kind of thrust into those roles, whether it was war or some kind of economic situations where they had to get into the workforce, or just culturally they married quicker, had children quicker, so it almost left them no choice. The path was kind of chosen for them earlier on. But I do feel like there are people that are interested, maybe looking at themselves authentically, figuring out, what, you had said in the book, that authentic connection with yourself, but they're searching and they're a little bit wayward. They're kind of languishing. Is there a way that they can focus that and try to figure it out? Or do they have to just wait it out and let it come to them?
Yeah, it's a great question. And there can be some blessings as well as curses associated with having a forced choice. Many of the decisions are made for us, and sometimes that can be a blessing, sometimes it's a curse. It really all depends on how good the fit is with our skill set and who we are and what we're about. One of the things that I took great delight in was reading Adam Grant's book, Think Again. He said, never ask a child or an adolescent or a college student what they want to be when they grow up. Because in all likelihood, the things they may wish to do when they're done with school may not even exist yet. Or some of those jobs may cease to exist. So ask them about the verbs. We talk a lot about what are your pronouns, but this is a good question. What are your verbs? What are the things that bring you joy and vitality when you do it? What requires energy from you but gives energy back? So I love asking people about their verbs. The second thing I think of is Barry Schwartz, who talks about the paradox of choice. Now, these days, we have so many options. Maybe it's too many options. And it can become overwhelming. Oh my gosh, what if I don't choose the best one? And one of the things that he has described in his research is that there are satisficers and optimizers. An optimizer is going through 100 different options and trying, by hook or by crook, I think that's the term, to find the best thing. And that can be really taxing. What he's found in his research and the research of others is that having 3 viable options and choosing the best of those 3 can be just about as good as going through 100 options. That being said, one of the things we also know is that we humans have a lot more in common than we do in terms of divergence. And listening to podcasts like this and hearing about the experiences of someone who's got some similarities to you may actually portend well for you. Like, you may hear about somebody's arc of not knowing what they wanted to do, finding their thing, and that thing is very similar to how you would feel about the same thing. So one of the things I always ask people to do when they're in the midst of a vocational crisis is talk to as many people from the vocation that you're considering getting into and find out what they love about this, what they don't love about this, what they wish they'd known when they'd started. And one of the reasons that I decided to become a psychologist, finally, was A, my best friend was doing it and he was describing it in a very loving fashion. B, my wife was doing it. And C, I'd always wanted to do it, but I didn't think I possessed the intellectual prowess to carry out the massive tasks of dissertation and licensure and all that other stuff. And in fact, some people told me I was not going to have the fortitude to do it. Thankfully, what I found is that if there's a big enough why, you will figure out how to take care of the how. And I had a huge why. I mean, I wanted this so badly. And this was the byproduct of hours of my own therapy and hours of my own research. I read Irv Yalom's book, which is called Love's Executioner, where he describes the work of a therapist. And I'm reading this book about this rich life of therapy and thinking, that's all I want to do. And I realized I'll do whatever it takes. And my wife and I took a HELOC, a home equity line of credit out on our house. I left my, fairly well-paid job with benefits and had no benefits during my, my 3,000-hour journey of a postdoc. And I got paid $10 an hour. So it was not elegant, but I had the immense support of an incredible woman. And not once did she flinch. She was 100% on board because she knew she was basically watching, a renaissance, a rebirth of this man who had felt so divorced from his life. So, and if we're going to be spending 90,000 hours working, it behooves us to like what we do or love what we do.
For sure.
Oh, I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that. It warms my heart. I'm really glad that you found this career and that you are really helping a lot of people. It seems that this is your passion. So let's go back quickly to would you call that mirror neurons when you're, or reticular activating system when you're looking for other people that are doing something similar? Is that a thing?
Yeah, so the mirror neurons, they're kind of a relatively new discovery in neurobiology. And it's really lovely. It's showing that this is the place from which empathy comes. Like if you're watching a soccer match all the way across the world and you see somebody get like kicked in the stomach, you feel it. And in the same way, our mirror neurons probably help us really feel into the experience of another, no matter what it is, including like when we're trying to imagine what would it be like for me to do this job.
And that makes it easier than actually having to do it. And then, I don't want to do that anymore.
That's right. You can run simulations. And then, perhaps if you're so fortunate, there's certain jobs that you can't do this with. But some jobs you can kind of be a shadow for a day and see like, what would this be like? I remember being a shadow for one of my buddies. He's a physician. He specializes in Lyme disease. And the reason we did this was because he wanted to be able to refer Lyme patients to me. And I was watching him and thinking to myself, first of all, wow, Lyme disease has multiple presentations. And B, there's no way I could have his stamina. He's made of something bionic. Like he was absolutely able to rock a kind of high demand, hard, uber painful syndrome. Like the complaints of people with Lyme are just profoundly heartbreaking, one after another. So I was with him for 8 hours. I saw 16 patients, and I knew for sure that was not going to become a specialty of mine, although I was happy to take some referrals, and I did enjoy working with people with Lyme disease for a period of time. But I also knew if I was thinking about getting an MD and specializing in Lyme, this was not my path. But one of the things that we can do in so many professions is exactly that, is be a shadow. And that's something I would also recommend. Running those types of simulations is a big deal.
Yeah, that's a great idea. And when you were talking about asking as many people in that vocation as you maybe can, would you say some people shouldn't ask or do too much advice seeking, that they might be swayed, or you have those naysayers? Should they be careful who they ask and how much, or should they find someone like you? Should they, go inward and do some inner work, or is it really very individualized?
It's very individualized. And, we have to be careful about who we ask for advice. I hear about people in my office telling me about the bad advice they've received from various parties, some of whom are very smart and very, authoritative in other areas. And one of the things that we tend to assume is, well, if my professor is an authority in this subject, therefore must be smart in everything. Turns out not necessarily so. And even if they are smart in every which way, they don't necessarily know you. What I would want is somebody to be very, very, very curious and reflective, and to reflect back what they're hearing more, so that you could hear your own voice being reflected to you by another person, and you might just come to your own conclusions. They say that the greatest genius is the one who basically lays out the stepping stones and helps you cross the river and makes you feel like you're a genius as you do so. And that's what I would be looking for. But there does come a point in time where you can cultivate a particular level of trust with the person, and you can ask them for their advice. Now, if you're going to ask for advice, bear in mind you might get the wrong advice. And one of the things that I would want said from anybody giving advice from a position of power would be, this is my knee jerk, or this is my, we could call it my system 2 thought process. Like, I've actually thought it out, and it could be wrong. You're going to need to try these on like a pair of shoes and walk around in them for a minute and see if they really fit. Oftentimes, like, it would have been ideal. I speak Japanese. I lived in Japan for a while. I'm good at math. I speak Spanish as well. It was a slam dunk. I should have gotten an international MBA and done business in these two, in Spanish-speaking countries and in Japan. Except for the fact that I had no interest in doing it. I would have been maybe okay at it. And I remember, God, this was so painful. We were about to have our first son. And I met with the Silicon Valley CEO, a friend of ours. And he's a big shot. And I was hoping that he would confer upon me the knowledge and tell me, Adam, you have a future in the corporate world. You have a future in sales. This is where you belong. And after he finished his oatmeal, he looked at me and said, you'll be fine at sales. You'll be fine in the corporate world, but you'll never be amazing. You don't love it enough. You belong doing something more akin to, I don't know, something in mental health or counseling. No, that is not what I want to hear. That is the most inconvenient. Now, it turns out this man happened to have been right. And I didn't want to hear it. It was a very inconvenient truth. It meant more schooling. It meant, as you heard, a lot of sacrifice. And it also meant a kind of conviction that I didn't have at the time. And so I would say, before you climb a big mountain, have conviction. Do the research. Do the cost-benefit analyses. Hope is not a strategy. Come up with a real roadmap to how you're going to get it. And ask yourself, is it worth it? And in my case, it was 100% worth it, ultimately. But I was still 4 years away from having that level of conviction and knowing, oh yes, this is my future. Actually 2 years away, but yeah. I would say,
how important was it to have a partner to, accompany you on that journey?
Love that
That's
question.
Supportive.
So I just learned a couple of weeks about a research project that was done with people who were just about to climb a mountain. And there were two groups. One was people climbing alone, or actually I'd say hiking up a fairly steep grade of a hill, and people climbing with a friend. And in the first group, when they were asked to estimate how much of a grade it was more severe when judged alone versus when judged with a friend. Like, oh, it's, let's say they said looks like it'll be about a 7 out of 10 level of difficulty when we're alone, and 5 out of 10 when I was with somebody. and somebody who
Wow.
who I like being with. So social support is a big deal. I mean, none of us does it alone. This idea of rugged individualism is a little bit, it runs counter to our human psychology. We are meant to be together. When Barbara Streisand sings that people who need people are the luckiest people in the world, I would say they're the luckiest only because they know they need people. We know we need people, and who we have with us is very important also. We want to have people who support us. I often think of that moment in Good Will Hunting where the Ben Affleck character looks at Matt Damon and says, I don't want to be drinking beer with you on Friday night. Get out of Southie. You got to move. And many, friends would be scared to say, go live your best life. I'm going to cheer you on, even if it means there will be less of you for me. So we want to be with people who are going to champion us. We become the average of the 5 people with whom we spend the most time. It's very important that we select the people who are advisory boards very carefully. I'd also recommend, by the way, to your earlier question, if I could just kind of add a little footnote, Brian, listen. I mean, listen to a lot of podcasts on topics, listen to a lot of books, audiobooks. I mean, Audible and Spotify, they all have tons of audiobooks. Become a geek in the area and ask yourself, is this interesting to me? Is this intrinsically interesting to me, not just extrinsically? Is this something that I want to become a geek around? Am I for me, when I came upon positive psychology, the study, the science of happiness, I could never learn enough about it. And psychology in general, my wife and I are such geeks that when we're traveling and we're sitting poolside, we're still reading psych. We just, and sharing with each other, oh my God, you're not going to believe this study. This is so cool. We sound like, geeks in some club in high school. But this portends well. If it doesn't feel like work and it's just intrinsically awesome, it portends really well.
Yeah, that's
actually going to ask
excellent.
How it was. It probably strengthened your relationship if you're
For sure.
reading all these psychology books. I mean, that's pretty awesome. And how about your friends? Are they like, oh gosh, here comes the happy couple?
And people ask about, like, what do your children think about that? And my kids love that both of their parents are psychologists.
Aww.
They think it's awesome. And we never weaponize psychology with each other or with our children. That would not be good if we were to suddenly start diagnosing each other or say, well, that sounded really such and such. We just engage like people who happen to know various tools and ways of listening. But it has allowed our arguments, I would say, to be higher level rather than we've and we become very efficient at getting through our any forms of conflict that we have. We hear each other out. We use the tools that we prescribe. One of my favorites comes from a guy named Harville Hendricks, who was huge on Oprah, gave her first Emmy, believe it or not. And he came up with this system where one person is the speaker and the other person is the listener, cannot comment. And that's the one we use when we're trying to sort something out. And it's really tempting for the listener to either editorialize or say, no, you're wrong, what you're saying. But we hear each other out. And it turns out that it is the most efficient process. So my friends, they like having they're totally down with the fact that their buddy's a psychologist, and I love hanging out with my people. Grabbing a beer. I was telling you, by the way, just a total side note about the importance of hanging with your friends, because one of the chapters I talk about friends, and one of the things I've isolated in my own practice is that friendship in adulthood is harder. And my buddy Jed Goldstein, who lives out in South Orange, who's one of my favorite human beings on the planet, I saw him this summer for the first time in 9 years. And I came to realize, wow, if I'm the age I am now, and we continue at this once every 9 year trajectory, I'll see him, if I'm lucky, 5 more times in my life. That's not okay. I realize I'm kind of digressing a bit, but you were asking me about friends, and he loves the fact that his buddy's a psychologist. He always told me that I should become one since we first met at a San Francisco startup.
Well, he was right. Before we, there's just so much to go on here, but a couple of things we had touched on. You had said there's more in common that we have than we might think. A lot of people who might be from disparate, diverse backgrounds have a lot in common. And one of the themes, or maybe what kind of led you to start wanting to write this book, was something that you had said in the foreword, I believe, is this unhappiness that you noticed across the board with all different kinds of people that you have worked with and observed. First, can we this unhappiness? So we need to define happiness for this discussion and for when you're referencing it. What's the definition there so we can have a baseline? I mean, that's a really broad and complex and word that's been used for a long time in many definitions by many different people. And then second, is there a common cause that you've discovered to the happiness? You said there's unhappiness that many of these groups and different types of people share. Is there a more frequent common cause that you've seen, particularly in men? Is there a commonality for what's causing that, maybe now in 2020 compared to the past? That's something that I'm really interested in. But first, unhappiness. What is happiness? How do you define that?
Yeah, that's a difficult one. There are three basic paths to happiness that have been kind of shown in the research. One is hedonics, just going after pleasant stuff. But unfortunately, it becomes like a treadmill over time. We are looking for more and more bonbons. Second one is having an engaged life where our skills are being used in a way that provides us with flow and challenge. But the third is creating a meaningful life. But I was really zeroing in on something that I thought was a precursor to all of those, and that is connection. And I spent 2 pages defining the word connection with 10 of my colleagues who are also licensed mental health professionals. And the bottom line is it's vitality. It is what makes you come alive. And you know it when you feel it. Like if you're in, like, I was just watching Wicked, the movie, the other night, and I'm a total Wicked geek. I just love that music. And I actually was hurting at the end of the movie because I'd been smiling so much, and you can't fake that. It's either there or it's not. And there were probably people in the audience for whom, they were there because of their spouse or, significant other and thinking, oh God, this sucks. How soon is this going to be over?
That's
a long smile too, because it was over 2-hour movie, right?
It was a 2-hour, 40-minute smile, and and you can't fake it. You know what makes you come alive. And if you think about it, in the DSM, which is my book that describes the book in mental health that describes all of the pathologies that we want to avoid, all of them have a component, virtually all of them at least, of disconnection. Depression is not connecting with the present because we're thinking about the past. Anxiety, we're tripping on the future. Trauma, we are dissociating or just kind of having, other experiences that keep us from being here and now. But when we are doing something that we truly love, and I think that a precursor for happiness is connection. And somebody might not have been born on the happy side of the bed, but they know when they feel connected. And I think connection is something that is all of our birthrights. And it takes time to plug in and figure out what will bring us alive, bring us that vitality. And I do believe that the more people who are connected in this way, the more happiness will circulate throughout the planet. We are not living in a vacuum. I will be kinder to my sons if I'm really connected. I remember having a panic attack. I was obviously not connected to myself at the moment. I thought I was having a heart attack. But because I was thinking to myself, I had a newborn son, and I was thinking to myself, how will I ever explain to him that I hate my work? And that I feel like I'm basically under somebody's thumb, and that's my job. And so now my kids are the beneficiaries of daddy being connected to himself. And you asked about men. Oh, good Lord. So I did a TEDx talk called Emotions, the Data Men Miss. Men love data, but they forget to really weigh in on their emotions. And what I see, it's almost so common, it's not even funny. I'll see a man in his 40s or 50s looking at me saying, I always knew I shouldn't have married her, but I was told to either, am I allowed to swear on this podcast? either shit or get off the pot. And I just figured it would be okay, and we'd find a way to make it work, even though I knew it wasn't okay, and even though I didn't think it was going to work. And lo and behold, here I am in the midst of this custody battle, and my life has kind of gone, the wheels have fallen off the bus. They didn't really check in with their emotions. And what's so sad is boys come out of the womb more connected emotionally, according to research, than their female counterparts. You would think that girls are the ones who come out more emotionally connected, but actually it's boys. But we unlearn it through socialization, i.e., don't listen to George Michael in high school, as I said earlier. So we become divorced from our own emotions, and everyone suffers. And so what do? We turn to, a little drinky, a little something else, and maybe affairs that lead into other issues. And rather than dealing with the emotions head on, because we don't know how to, we know how to use the tools in our toolbox, but not the ones in our brain to deal with our emotions. So they become very, very estranged and scary.
At what age would you say the boys lose that emotional connection to themselves or others?
I'm forgetting the ages, but if I recall correctly, and I may need to get back to you, but I think it was somewhere around 3 or 4. But it really depends on the male authorities. I mean, you'll hear well-intentioned male authority figures saying guys don't do that, or boys don't cry, or and they think they're doing the right thing. And that's why I say well-intentioned, because that's how they were taught, and that's how they were jumped into the gang of the Brotherhood of Men. But it turns out we all lose out when we don't know how to attend to that data source called our emotions, and they're there for a reason. And we've also seen in brains that lose their emotional centers, they can't make decisions at all. So we know for sure that emotions play a key role in our decision-making processes.
So how do you teach those men that are not connected? They're sitting across from you and they're like, I'm fine, or it doesn't bother me. How do we reconnect that? How do they cry, primal scream? How can they get that moving?
The first thing, I describe it at length. I give 7 basic steps that I deal with when I'm working with a man. And the first is like help them understand the taxonomy of feelings, and that when they say I'm disappointed or I'm annoyed, yeah, that's a cover of emotion. There's actually something deeper. Annoyed and disappointed often means sad. And we don't want to cop to that, because it doesn't sound like a very manly thing to admit that I'm sad. And so one of the things I help them do is come up with a taxonomy, the language of emotions, and begin to address them in real time. And sometimes you're not going to be super popular when you say to your partner, like it's like this double-edged sword. Like the females in their lives, assuming they're heteronormative in that way, they're in a heterosexual relationship, they may say to their husbands, I wish you were more emotionally connected. Well, guess what happens when they show up a little more emotionally connected? Oftentimes the spouse says, dude, back off. I don't want to hear all this. And the guy's like, which way do I go? And yeah. And Brene Brown talks about that as well. Like how it's hard, women want their men to be vulnerable. And when their men are vulnerable, sometimes it doesn't go so well. So one of the stages I call it conviction. Like, no, stay clear, stay true. It takes immense courage to stand in your emotional truth. Like, no, actually, this idea of us having this type of vacation this summer makes me feel chilled to the bones and really sad that I'm going to be using my PTO for this. I don't want to be going to your mom's house up in the Catskills. That sounds just dreadful. The last 2 times we were there, or otherwise we end up doing what I call consent and resent. We consent, we say yes, and then we resent the other person, we resent all the other people, and we resent ourselves for saying yes. And it also leads to other, potentially dangerous behaviors.
Yeah, consent and resent is definitely one I'm going to steal, but cover up emotions is awesome. That is just like a great descriptor. I love that. These guys, I worry like Tara about them. How do we reconnect them to that? And I think the older people get, the harder it is for them to reconnect. I mean, not that it's impossible for sure. There are other challenges too of just, it's hard to make friends, especially in society. One of my big things is the fellowship, the places where fellowship used to be found, right, are kind of crumbling in society, right? There's like this one bowling alley in one county, or like out of 4 counties, they just put up a Wawa in its place, right? The church is kind of something that people have more of like a one-on-one connection with God. There are pockets where, of course, people are still going to big congregations, but that maybe afterwards, the hanging out with the parents and the fellowship of a lunch is maybe not done as much. Different clubs and groups, where men used to congregate, everything's individualized. There's more remote work. So it's harder for them to, especially if they came from a previous generation of uncles and dads that were the strong silent type. It may be difficult to have those interpersonal skills just kind of almost innately within them. But if you really want to make connection, and you had said something that is so true about the average of like the 5 people that are closest to you. How can you spot, are there tells where there are people that are connected with themselves? Because you want to make those quality decisions in expanding your tribe or your friend group. Is there a way that you figured out to, when you're trying to put the time out and put yourself out there and connect with somebody, maybe it's someone that's going to be a mentor or a good guy without even knowing? I know you have to take a chance, but are there ways you can tell, oh, this is somebody that is connected with their self. They're maybe a little bit ahead of me. They're on the right path. They're going to be honest with me. They're going to be genuine. They're going to be empathetic. I'm compassionate. Are certain traits, characteristics we should look for when we're trying to, make acquaintances and friendships?
Yeah, I think you're almost asking 2 different things. And one of them relates to mentorship and one of them relates to friendship. And mentorship, I'm a huge fan of. Like Mr. Miyagi and Yoda all day. Like Obi-Wan Kenobi, yes, please. I have had some amazing mentors in the academic realm, in the professional realm, and becoming, a budding psychologist. I've always sought out mentorship. I've always been willing to show up very humbly saying, I know nothing, and I'm going to show you my greatest belly flops. And is this a safe place for me to do that? For me, that's been the criterion. Can I show you my worst? And can we carefully tear it apart? And so I can learn from these mistakes, because you and I both know you can learn from mistakes, and yet some teachers don't really provide that kind of safety for you to completely screw up. So a huge fan of mentorship. Friendship, one of the ways we can really assess, is this a good fit, is what I call the drive away test. You get in your car after hanging out with your buddy with a beer, and you notice how you feel. Do you feel taller? Do you feel happier? Do you feel full? Or do you feel like, oh my God, I told him about my trip to Japan over the summer, and he just completely said, oh yeah, I'd never go to Japan, or he went on a 20-minute rampage about his trip to Japan, but didn't hear anything about, like, was there a good back and forth? Was there a good upload download? And sometimes we feel used, or it's just all back to self. I'm not, of course, even in good relationships, some of these happen once in a while, but if it's happening, like if it's a trend, maybe invest your time in other friends who have a better drive away test profile, where you drive away saying, oh dude, that was great. I developed this idea of the drive away test. My buddy Bob lives 2 hours away, and San Francisco is right in the middle of us. So we meet in San Francisco, and parking always sucks. And as I'm driving up, I'm like, oh shit, it's crap, it's Saturday, and I can't believe I'm driving up on Saturday. And then I hang out with Bob for 4 hours, and it's great. And as I drive away, I'm like way taller, and it's always worth, not just streaming my Netflix and getting out of the comfort of just doing nothing. One of the things we know is usually we need to pay to play in order to get the stuff back. Like the easy stuff doesn't usually give us a big ROI profile. Driving to the city to hang out with somebody awesome like Bob pays hard. But if I drove to the city to be with somebody who always brought it back to themselves, or just sucked all the air out of the room, I would drive back with that kind of consent and resent feel. So one of the things I realized as I got older, like there seem to be these trends in our lives. When we're kids, whoever lives nearby is your best friend. It doesn't really matter. They're into the same stuff. It's all good. In high school, maybe you try to find your social group where you're going to be able to feel safe and protected, and maybe people you party with. In college, it might be people in your dorm, it might be people in your major, but then you move away from college. And then eventually you've moved maybe 2 or 3 times, as some of us do, and sometimes even more. And each time promising you'd stay in touch with these great people, and you don't. You don't. Good intentions, but things happen, and then you have kids and you become friends with your kids' friends' parents. And it's like, okay, well, we're sitting here talking about, okay. We're talking, oftentimes guys will talk about tech, politics, or sports. Like those are the 3 safe zones. And I'm not saying those aren't great. I love talking about tech, politics, and sports. But although not as much about politics these days because it's been just such a downer. But I do love talking about tech and sports. But we might need more richness. We might need a larger variety of friends. As Esther Perel tells us, we used to live in villages where we had a bunch of different people for a bunch of different things. We would have somebody we were hunting with, somebody we'd build stuff with, somebody who, you'd always hang out to go drinking with. And now we look at our spouses and say, you have to fill all of those roles for me. And it's just in the marriage is suffering badly, because I know for sure my wife is not going to want to watch the Golden State Warriors with me ever.
Right.
She might do it, but she has no interest. It's like a panda on a tricycle. Like she could probably ride the tricycle, but she'll never get good at it, and she'll never want to. And similarly, there's things that she want to do that maybe I don't want to do, and she's got her girlfriends for that. So we can lean on our spouses for a lot of stuff, but we can't lean on them for everything. And that's one of the other places where friends save the day.
Absolutely. Excellent.
That's so huge. It was funny when Brian was asking that question. I was like, "Oh man, nobody's gonna want to go to your friend interview." That's a lot of pressure for that friend, Brian. But
well, I actually view. I'll tell you, I view different people through different lenses. Like I see them as having superpowers. There might be somebody I would want to go to Chase Center and watch the Warriors with, but wouldn't want to talk about my deep emotional stuff. So they don't have to meet all of them. Think of the Marvel or DC Comics superheroes. They can't do everything. But we know that Spider-Man can do some amazing things that Superman cannot. And Wonder Woman can do some things that neither of them can do. So I try to help people look at their friends as having superhero skills that are unique and valuable.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I love the way that you definitely pointed out that we put a lot on our partners to be everything. So that's huge. Friends are very important. And I'm just teasing. Brian's I think because he's a very deep and thoughtful and caring friend, that he probably has high expectations for that in his friends. So in terms of friendship, is there a way that we can not stop having friends, after college or, when we're adults? But how do we do that in terms of connection? Like, how do we get the connection back? That's part 1. And then part 2, do you notice Japan being a collectivist culture, that they have the same issues that we do with the identity and the comparisonitis?
That's a really good one. It's been over 31 years since I've lived in Japan, but let's first talk about how to make friends. I love this movie called I Love You Man, starring Paul Rudd and Jason Segel and Rashida Jones. Just great film. If you haven't seen it, it's just beautiful. But you see Rashida Jones and Paul Rudd are about to get married, and she's got like a nice group of friends, as many women do, and he's got like no real friends. And he says, "Oh my gosh, I wish there was a book on this." And the fact of the matter is, it requires that thing that Brene Brown's always talking about. It requires vulnerability to reach out to somebody saying, "Hey, well, I know we're both over 40, but do you want to go out and play? You want to go grab a beer? Want to go bowling? To your point, you want to go do a thing?" And it always means that you could get a rejection, or you could get ghosted, or God knows what. So it does, and sometimes you'll find that it's not a match, and it's like, oh shoot, he seemed so cool, like we could have been buds.
Aside from this book. What can you recommend to our listeners, a book that was either really impactful on you, stands out, you would recommend anyone to read at some point in their life?
There are two books that immediately come to mind. One of which was one of my favorite books that I've ever read. I read it twice in 1 month. And that would be Think Again by Adam Grant. I think especially in these times, it really allows a person to gather some tools around knowing how to think and rethink a thing before taking action. Oftentimes we just, for the sake of efficiency, just take action, or sometimes we engage in inaction because we're so overwhelmed. But Think Again, I think, is one of the greatest books I've ever read. The other is by a Jungian analyst. It's a shorter book. It's called The Middle Passage. It's by James Hollis. And I am in love with this man. He's visited me twice on the podcast, and
Wow.
even Andrew Huberman, who was interviewing him, was like kind of shaking in his boots. That you feel like you're in the presence of one of the smartest human beings who's ever lived. So those would be the two that come to my mind. James Hollis is a book on midlife. It's called The Middle Passage. It's amazing.
Well, you just got me super psyched. We were just talking about him last night.
We were, and yeah, no, swear to God. And when he came up, when we were doing some recon, and when he came, kind of refreshing ourselves on you, Dr. Dorsay, and then he had come up in a conversation, and then Tara's just like blurts out, "Oh, this is amazing," or something, and then here you are. It's coming full circle.
Oh my gosh, yeah, he's been on twice, and I remember I called this I called it my second bar mitzvah when I interviewed him. It was like I was shaking my boots. I was like, oh my God, I hope I sound smart enough to talk to him. But, because it required so much vulnerability on my part. And some of the people who've listened to the first interview with him said, you were nervous, weren't you? And I was like, yeah, I was definitely nervous. Meeting your heroes. And he was as cool of a person and kind of a person as I could have dreamt. He's the real deal.
Yeah, I have to, I have a question that I usually close with, but there are a couple things before I get to that. If you got a sec.
No, for sure.
We talked about the commonalities of the people that you work with and the ones that are struggling with unhappiness, and the different challenges on being unable to kind of build those form those vital connections as of yet in their journey. The people that you are in awe of and that you are impressed with and that you can sense, wow, they really have that connection, to that authentic connection to themselves and others. What are some of the common rituals, traits, characteristics? What are some of the things that they're doing that are making them so successful, making the connections?
Well, I would say that they probably do something akin to what I call feeding themselves. It's an acronym, and it's the F.E.E.D. They are engaged at least a good amount of the time in activities that provide them with flow. So the first F stands for flow. Flow is this thing that you're nodding because I know you know about this, but Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi is the primary investigator of this thing, that this experience of being so immersed in an activity, and it's so challenging and wonderful that 3 hours of it feels like 30 minutes. So flow is present. The second one would be E for energize. I kind of referenced it earlier, but the good stuff requires energy from us, but gives us energy back. I mean, you know what it's like when you've had a good workout or a really good writing session or a good podcast. It takes energy from you. But on the other side, you're like, hell yeah, that was great. So glad I did that. The third is educate. And is it causing you to learn? One of the things we know is that learning provides us with a lot of dopamine. And are you having that experience of, is it moving the needle in a meaningful way? And the fourth is D for depth. Is it meaningful? We are not just Homo sapiens, we're Homo symbolicus. We are meaning-chasing creatures. I was working with a guy who was in biotech. He had his PhD in biology, and he was a single man. He described his body as being the dad bod of all dad bods, like the ultimate dad bod. And he'd get home from work after a long commute. He'd smoke a bowl and watch like 70s TV, and he'd wake up and just kind of dread the commute and come home and rinse, repeat. And one of the things that he and I did was we reinvigorated his love of botany. He loves plants. And that's one of the reasons he got into biology in the first place. And so he started studying about plants. He started planting. He'd get up early in the morning to make sure that before the sunlight, before his commute, he would get some planting time in. So he was exercising on the so that he could build his body, so that he could carry the heavy stuff. And it was deeply meaningful. And he'd have people over, and he'd have barbecues, and people would love his garden. And he found that he was smoking way less weed and not watching, this mindless TV. He was kind of geeking out to learning about his plants and making this ridiculous, just unbelievable garden. So we can all do that, but we need to find our thing. And everybody's thing is going to be a little different. Everybody has a different connection formula. But one of the things I know for sure is that many of us have somehow divorced ourselves from the guitar that we used to play. And it's sitting in our attics. And we just need to bring it back. And we will suck relative to how well we played 20 years ago. But if we allow ourselves to lean into the suck and play through, we may find a new love affair with the guitar that we never imagined, which provides all of the 4 dimensions of F.E.E.D. All of us have something and maybe it's something we've never tried. So one of the things we need to do is expose ourselves to a lot of different things and see what works. Some of us may, kind of be like bees flittering from flower to flower and kind of have these feed moments, but not a long-term relationship. That's fine too. And some of us, like my dad at 85, is playing the piano. He hadn't played the piano since the single digits. He'd gone through like a 70-year break from the piano, and now he's playing and he loves it.
Wow. Amazing. Yeah, that's so true. I mean, flow state is something we talked about. That's so real. Sometimes when we have, like you had said, an amazing pod, it's late. Sometimes we like to kind of be together at the same location when we record, and we'll get done. It'll be late, and well, maybe even leading into kind of you're psyching yourself up, you're hyping yourself up, but then when you get done, I'm like almost running out to like in person, be like, oh my gosh, they were like ascended. That was just, everything was great. I can't believe we got that feedback at the end. That was awesome. And the same thing with working out. I can remember when with my daughter, my first child, you have obviously the obligations. You're working, then you have the baby and mom and everything when you get home. And sometimes the only time to work out would be at night. So I would leave to go to the gym and as I talk to my wife, I have to go out do this, and she'd be like, this hour? But I would almost be floating home. I can just remember it'd be late at night, but you're on that high. You're still in that like energy level, like you said, and it's so key. So FEED, great acronym there. There's so much, and it's been such a pleasure having you on, and I definitely hope to do it again because we don't really touch the surface. But what does Dr. Dorsay do? Maybe can you give us behind the curtain a little bit some of the practices that you have to keep those connections really, really strong, right? And really strengthened, whether it's to yourself, others, the world, maybe 1 or 2 things that you make sure you do every day or a couple of days every single week that if you go time without doing them, something's a little bit off. Are there some non-negotiables there that Dr. Dorsay has?
Sure. One of the things I do is I read about comedy all the time. I'm obsessed with the minds of comedians. And I spend a lot of time listening to comedians. I love listening to live comedy, but I also just love getting their life stories and listening to how they think. So I spend a lot of time geeking out to comedy. So that would be one thing that I do for sure. Another one, I take just a tip from Stevie Wonder, who's saying, I just called to say I love you. I have no problem calling my friends and just saying, hey man, just call and say I love you. Just what's up? I don't have any agenda. What's going on? That's something I will do when I'm walking the dog. I walk my dog every night, and oftentimes I'm listening to a comedian or calling a good friend. Something I do for sure is I make sure that things between my wife and me are awesome, or at least good, ideally awesome. That's the most important relationship I've ever had. And I remember learning about this great scholar who, anytime his daughter would interrupt him when he was writing, he would just spend time with his daughter. His daughter was describing him, and I thought, I need to do more of that. So I'm doing my best. I mean, my older one is already off in college, and I've cried like, oh my God, it's gone by so fast. And I just do my best to really prioritize them so that they know unequivocally that they are my priority. So those are some things I do. Of course, my podcast is really fun. It gives me a lot of joy, and it has a fair, like, just like you were saying, Ryan, it has a long half life. Like when I talk to somebody who's amazing, just talking to the two of you tonight, I'm just going to be like, ebullient when I see my wife. I'm like, hey, I just talked to great people in New Jersey.
Have you had your wife on the pod?
She says no to that. She's not. She's not into the whole, extemporaneous thought that it, is like being, in the spotlight. She's a deep thinker, and she's amazing as a wife, as a psychologist, as a mom, as a friend. But she's not into like show business. that is part of the podcast. She said no, but I have had my father on, who also said, interestingly, he said, I have nothing to say. So episode number 150 was, and he was amazing. He delivered a podcast. I don't know if you've heard of Lori Gottlieb, the woman who wrote Maybe You Should Talk to Someone, but she sent me an email immediately after, said that was the best thing I've heard. Like, my dad destroyed, and he had no confidence. So I've been trying,
because he was probably so real, right, and authentic, and
so real.
He wasn't coached or scripted in any way.
0%. And I do believe my wife would deliver a killer interview if she would just allow herself. But so far, I've been getting no's.
Maybe one day.
One can hope. I think she'll be great.
Yeah, well, I want to just reiterate what you said and encourage our listeners to check in with their partner, see if they're okay. Text someone or call them that they haven't heard from in a while to say, I love you. And let your kids interrupt you when they want to say hi. Just be present with them. So we're so grateful for you. Thank you so much for coming on. You're very inspirational. Your energy is just beautiful. So thank you for the work that you do.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, it's been an absolute pleasure. We learned a lot. There's a lot of deep, elements and thoughts that we discussed, but also, a lot of bite-sized and actionable pieces of advice that we really appreciate, and I know our listeners, viewers will as well. Where can people find out more about you? Order the book online? What's the easiest? What's the best social? Amazon? Can you let us know where they can connect with you?
Sure. Just putting either Adam Dorsay, Dorsay, into your Amazon search bar will yield that, or Super Psyched, spelled as 2 words. Although my Super Psyched podcast is 1 word, I couldn't quite get that for the book. I'm easily findable. You just put my name in Google, you'll see all kinds of stuff about me, including my 2 TEDx talks, one on the emotions in men and the other on friendships and adulthood. And my podcast is certainly readily available on all platforms. And I'm always happy to hear from people. So yeah, and I definitely want, of course, for selfish purposes, I want the book to get out there, but I actually firmly believe that based on the feedback I'm getting from people who have been using it, because there's all kinds of tools in the book to use to have a more connected life, I think that
it's really good. Get and I've read all the self-help books. This one is good.
Thank you, Tara.
Like, you can actually do the things that you recommend.
Totally. These are the cookies are right on the shelf, easily grabbable.
Yeah, and it's well written. You're a writer. Did you know that?
I am really gratified to hear that. That's for sure.
Awesome. Well, we've been listening and chatting with Dr. Adam Dorsay. Adam, thank you so much. A pleasure meeting you. Hopefully we can definitely do it again. Good luck with sales. And, you've already done a great job paying it forward in your practice. And now the fact that you're able to reach a broader audience is just, a benefit for the rest of society and then everyone else that's going to be reading. So thank you very much for what you've been doing.
Right back at you, Brian. Tara, it's so great meeting with you. And I it's just been such a pleasure speaking with such open-hearted and smart people. It's been a blast.
Okay, you got it. Great talking to you. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of the Journey to Your Best Self podcast. We appreciate you being part of this community. For more resources, insights, and ways to connect, head over to youroneself.com. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow us on YouTube, Instagram, and wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts, including Apple, Spotify, and Overcast. Your support means the world to us. Until next time, keep aligning your mind, body, and spirit, and peace, love, and self-discovery.
Yeah.